You want to come up? Come on. Come here. Come on. Come on. Come here. Come here. Come here. All right, fine. Go back inside. My dogs don't love me. Check, check. One. What? Can you close the door, actually? What's up, everyone? Welcome to Redline TV. I'm your lovely, I always do lovely. I always describe myself.
Lovely host, Julian Rivera.
I don't appreciate the sass. All right. It's your game host, Theo Jules. We're gonna play a little Redline classic called Would You Rather. I'm gonna give you guys a few would you rather options, and you're going to type your answers in the chat, but don't just say the answer. Explain why. We wanna know what makes you tick. We wanna know the method behind the madness. So don't just type in your answer. Type in your answer and defend yourself. Why pick that answer, all right? Type your answers in the chat, and let's see what you guys think. What would you rather do? Let's play. All right, first would you rather question. Would you rather see your future or change your past?
I brought it to you.
I want her to come on her own will.
You see it?
Nope. That's it. That's my other dog. Not my dog, but my parents' dog. Why don't you show everyone while they decide, while they figure out if they'd rather be able to see their future or change their past. Thank you. This is Delilah. Hey there, Delilah, what's it like in New York City? My mom loves the bows. Probably just gonna go off and do my own thing while you guys fight over what your answer is. What are you doing? Get out of here. So what do you think? Would you want to see your future or change your past? Hindsight is 20/20, right? We all know what we could have done in the past, but in the moment, sometimes it's hard to make those decisions at those crossroads, right? But to see your future, that might be even cooler, so you know what path to go on. But here's the caveat with seeing your future is like, I feel like I'm gonna like get myself in trouble, or I'm gonna see things that like I wish I didn't see, you know what I mean? Like almost like ignorance is bliss, you know what I mean? Finish up arguing your points because we're gonna move on to the next would you rather question. Would you rather know the history of everything that you've touched or be able to talk to animals? For the first option, we're talking like anything you come into contact with that you know the history, how it was made, you know where it's been. So like for all you germaphobes out there, that might be a little scary, knowing where that dollar has been, you know what I'm saying? And then being able to talk to animals, I mean, that's pretty cool. You ever see Dr. Dolittle? Like that would be interesting. Like Snow White, where all these animals are like walking up to your door and you're just like, oh. I'd be making like play dates with animals. I'd like have like little gatherings, just have a party, an animal party. That's another thing. What do you eat though at an animal party? You can't grill meats. I mean, where's that meat coming from, right? You can't have fish, you can't have chicken, no beef, no rattlesnake. So all animals, what are they? Vegan? Well, not all animals are vegan, but you're offending someone if you're inviting every animal to an animal party. It's like, all right, well, what do you have? You got vegetables? So everyone all of a sudden becomes, you know, herbivores. Mr. Bear is like a vegetarian. Wow, I did not expect that. He's grilling up portobello mushrooms on the grill. It's like, okay, I guess that's cool. So which would you rather do? Know the history of everything that you've ever come to contact with, or talk to animals? I think they'd both be pretty cool. Write your answers in the chat, explain why, do it quickly, because we're moving on already to the next would you rather question. Would you rather have unlimited free first class international flight tickets or never spend another dollar at a restaurant in your life? That's a tough one. I don't know. What do you guys think? Her name is Perla. In Spanish, it's Bella. Okay, all right. Go home. If you like to travel, option A makes sense. If you like to eat, and we all like to eat, it seems like a no-brainer. But with all the money that you'd probably be saving on traveling and flying to just all these different places, I'd probably use that money to go spend on crazy foods that I've never had before, the things that I would like to try at some point in my life. But the food thing, man, never have to pay. You know how much money I spend on food and takeout and lunch and all that stuff? Like, think about that for a second. I'd be saving up a lot more if I didn't spend so much money eating out. All right, next one. Would you rather be forced to dance every single time you hear music play, or be forced to sing anytime a song comes on? And this one's tough depending on who you are. If you got a great voice, you may want to lean into the song. If you don't, and you know who you are, and if you don't know who you are, you should know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, your friends should tell you who you are. Dance moves, I feel like if you got to dance, if you're a good dancer or bad dancer, it's going to be embarrassing no matter which way you cut it, right? It's going to be a random time, a song is going to come on in the middle of Target, and you got to be like, boom, oh, I love this jam. You don't even have to say I love it. It's like, oh no, here it comes. Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. I don't mind embarrassing myself. I don't know. It's like, how would I want to be embarrassed is ultimately the question. If you're not a good singer, if you're not a good dancer, finish up with your answers in the chat. Explain why. We're going to move on to the next Would You Rather question in about 10 seconds. And here we go, the last Would You Rather question. Would you rather be able to breathe underwater or breathe in space? I don't know. Let me see what you guys have to say about it. Type your answers. Why? Do you think doing it in space would be a lot cooler? Why is it? Do you think underwater would be better? I don't know. You tell me. Wow, this thing is... Sorry, my computer got really, really hot out here. Ooh, bugs. All right. Ooh, oh, did I just spill all that? I think I did. Oh my gosh, I'm a mess here. All right. Now, space is ginormous. Space is like huge, expansive, and not many people have the opportunity to go to space. At some point, I believe we will. This will be like a common thing. It's like, oh, let's take a vacation. Yeah, let's go to the moon. Let's go to Zebulon 5. Let's go to, whatever. So that might come in handy around that time. Breathing underwater, though, has always been a lifelong dream of mine. Have I thought about becoming scuba certified? Absolutely. Would I be absolutely terrified to do it? Absolutely. With that, I would go treasure hunting in the water, treasure diving rather. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys so much for playing. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on what you would rather do. It's always nice to kind of see what our peers would say and kind of like, figure out what makes them tick. A couple minutes, we're going to have an awesome message. But first, I'm going to kick it off to Lauren Steckley as she's going to introduce what we're doing tonight.
Hey Redline, thanks for playing with us and allowing us to get to know you all a little better. Right now, we're going to transition to our episode called Race and Grace, a personal, historical, and biblical worldview on social justice and racism. We realize the sensitivity of this topic, and so we ask that we all listen with open hearts and with the grace that's been extended to us in Jesus Christ. If you want, we encourage you to get a notebook and take notes. After this talk, there will be instructions for how you can participate in a breakout session if you want to enter the conversation. It might be good to bring your notebook to reference thoughts and questions along the way. Right now, we're going to hand it over to Amanda, Crystal, Damien, and Olivia. Amanda will host the conversation where Crystal is going to share her personal story as a Black mother, Christian, and artist in our world. We'll then hear from Olivia and Damien Betances, two educators of social studies, world and American history, where they'll teach us what has occurred in history that has led us to where we are today in America around race. And finally, Amanda will close by sharing some scripture and showing us how Jesus firmly responded to questions about who we, as Christians, should love and about racial injustice in his cultural context.
That I can wipe my nose.
Oh my God, it's so hot.
This will be the outtakes.
I have to go to the bathroom.
Excuse me.
Are we married?
Hey guys, what is up? My name is Amanda Smith and I'm the director of Redline Youth here at the Life Christian Church. And tonight's episode of Redline TV is a little different than what we normally do. Tonight I have some special guests here who I'll introduce to you in just a minute, but they're here to enter into a productive conversation related to a lot of things going on in our country and society today. And as we know, a lot of conversations are happening around racial issues in our nation, and we wanted to be able to add to the conversation enlightening ourselves and others to the personal experience of people today, of the historical context, and most importantly, how to look at it and act on it biblically. We have 3 people who are going to join me in this conversation to help address each of these angles. First is Crystal Adams. What's up, Crystal?
Hey.
Crystal is an actress, a writer, and longtime TLCC member and Redline mom. Go Redline Youth.
Yep.
And second is Olivia Pitances. She is the executive director of HR and operations at TLCC. Hi, Liv. She's also the dean of students and former social study teacher at Teaneck High School. And a lot of people don't know this, but Olivia is also my sister. So we have that special connection there. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Damian Pitances, who is a school guidance counselor at Summit High School, track coach, and former history teacher at Teaneck High School. What is up, Damian?
Hey, how you doing? What's going on, everybody?
So to kick off our conversation, I'm excited to talk with Crystal as she shares personal stories as a Black woman in America and a mother in our world. We know that not everyone's experiences are the same, but it's always great to get a first-person perspective. And as Pastor mentioned in one of his previous sermons a few weeks ago, I think it is, God desires for us to empathetically understand with our hearts. And we believe a great way to do this is by leaning in and by listening to someone's story. So Crystal, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm blessed. I'm good. Thanks for asking.
Well, we're so happy to have you. You're awesome. You've been a friend to me and a great conversation partner in this time. So when you're ready, tell us a little bit about your experience as you've watched everything happen in our world around race.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I could start with, I'm originally from Brooklyn. And I know this is something that all Brooklynites always say. They're from Brooklyn. They love it. They're proud. And I'm one of those people who happen to be proud to be from Brooklyn. But I say that only because moving to New Jersey was a little bit of a culture shock. And when my husband and I decided to move to the town we live in, which is Milburn Short Hills, we didn't really know how much of a culture shock it would be. But I said that, I would bite the bullet. And when I say bite the bullet, I meant when you're the minority in an area, it's really easy to feel like a fish out of water. And it's easy to feel like that on the regular, like daily. So you go to the store and you feel a little bit out of place. You go to the school, you feel a little bit out of place. You go to the park, you feel a little bit out of place. And so that was one of the things that I said, okay, I have to recognize that this is something that I'm going to have to carry with me and not to let it seep into my children's experience here. But of course, things happen over time. So for me, it was, okay, let's live here because we knew they were going to get a great education, and that was really important to us. And we did it. And we still live here. We've had some things happen directly and indirectly to us and to friends, to our children, and to other friends' children. And, the earliest thing would be my son when he was 5 years old. When he was 5 years old, he told me that a friend of his said that he couldn't play with him because he was allergic to brown skin. And if you can imagine the shock that comes with knowing like a 5-year-old said this, and a 5-year-old can articulate that they are allergic, they like physically can't be with you because of somebody's skin color. That was really hard to comprehend. And so we spoke to the teacher about it, and we kind of like said, okay, let's not let it slide, but let's not make a huge deal of it, until a few days after I was checking in with him, and I said, so honey, how's your friend? Are you guys playing together? And he said, oh yeah. He said he can play with me now because he's not allergic to light brown skin. He's allergic to dark brown skin. And I was speechless. I was speechless, and that's really hard for me. And I had to look into his little eyes and say, do you understand why that's not okay? You know, that's saying he can play with you, but he can't play with me. Or he can play with daddy, but he can't play with grandma. Or he can't play with grandpa, you know, because look at all the shades of brown that exist in our family. And like, you could see it like in his eyes, like this shift that happens. It's like, and a small, like, it's like the balloon of innocence being pierced and letting a little bit of air out, you know? And it's one of the saddest things to see, you know, to have that kind of conversation and to see what it does to a child, you know? It became a teachable moment because we were able to talk to the teacher, and the parent had no idea that her child said this to my son. And she reached out to me. She apologized to me. She had a discussion with her son and said, what if somebody said this about us? What if they said they were allergic to Russians? And automatically the kid got it. And they were able to have discussions in class, you know, age appropriate discussions in class. And so something like that was kind of eye-opening in the way that I, as a Black parent, I may be having more of these conversations than I care to. It's going to be my responsibility to have conversations whether I want to or not. Right. There are going to be things that happen to them or happen to a friend, or they witness happen to a stranger, or they witness on television, that I have to confront with them. And that's not a burden you always want to bear. Sometimes you just want to, you know, go outside on the swings and just play and, you know, live a normal life. But as we're seeing more and more, there are more scenarios in which we have to keep talking to our children, and we have to help them navigate through this world, through this country of race, you know, and as you put it, race and grace, you know?
So tell us a little bit more about, you know, you mentioned how these are just conversations that you have to have with your kids, and it's very interesting and enlightening to hear, and happy to hear that the teacher engaged their classroom in these types of conversations. Tell us a little bit more about what your decision as a parent and a Black woman has been for your family to bring your students, your kids into our diverse church or a diverse environment, and what your reasoning and purposing behind that is.
So I didn't realize how important it was to me until we moved here. So I've been going to TLCC about a little over 10 years, and I call it home. I walked in, I remember trying to find it, getting lost. This was when it was on Harrison, and saying to God, I'm going to find this church. I'm going to find this church. And my kids were babies then. And it was just the two of us, and my husband was at work. And when I found it, I just remember feeling like home. And I can't explain it. You just walked in and you just felt like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. And it's immediate. And then I remember one Sunday I was sitting and I looked at every person in a pew, and they were all a different nationality. And for me, that was huge, because I needed to know that my kids saw children and adults that looked like them, but also saw kids that didn't look like them, from other parts of the world, other parts of our area, other parts of our country, different races, different colors, different backgrounds. Like, that's what heaven is to me. That's what I believe heaven is going to look like when we all get there. And so for me, I needed my kids to feel that. Now, especially again, living in a predominantly white area, it was really important that my kids had an outlet from that, in case they were feeling what I might have been feeling, where like sometimes I felt like a fish out of water, in case they were feeling that in their classrooms, and if they were feeling that in their grades. You know, if they were the only ones in their class of color, or if they were the only ones in their grade, of color. I wanted them to have a place where they can go and they can breathe, and breathe easy and just be, and not feel worried about their environment. And then you add the love of Christ on top of that, and it's it's priceless. It's priceless, because you have not only diversity, you've got, your brother or sister from, our life group, we had people from the Philippines and from Ghana. And like, where else can you go where you look to your left and someone's different, you look to your right and someone's different, and we're all just grateful to God that we're in each other's lives, we're sharing life. And I think that's so important. As Christians, we're to share life, and not just life in the church, not just church life, but outside of the church life, the things that are happening in our world, the things that are happening in this country. Especially being in a diverse church, things that deal with race. We should be sharing that life with each other. We can't be in a church that's diverse and not recognize the pains of some of our brothers and sisters, because I don't think that's what Christ fully required of us. I think he required us to go into the battlefield and love, but love deeply enough that we would cry with each other, pray with each other, feel with each other, live with each other, understand the struggles, and really try to empathize. That's what I think Christ wanted for us, and in order for us to have deep and meaningful relationships with each other under God. And that's what I wanted for my children. I wanted my children to have a connection, a deep connection and understanding of what it is to have people in your life that truly have your back. And again, not in like just the church life, but in life. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. That's just a very powerful story to hear, the experience and the burden that you carry as a mom in your neighborhood, in your world, and the burden that you've carried for your own children. And I think it's just very important for people to hear that, because that's not a reality of a lot of people. And I think it's important for people to, like we said, listen. I think especially like what we're doing here, and having these kinds of conversations and listening to Black stories, I think is so important, because it allows people to open their ears and open their eyes. And I think especially from a Christian perspective, as Pastor previously stated, understand with their hearts. It's not just about feeling, right? It's also about, like what you're saying, doing something. And I think engaging those conversations like you've had, like you've said, actively living amongst people who are different from you on purpose for multiple reasons. Correct me if I'm wrong. A big one for you is a kingdom reason, kingdom purpose.
Absolutely.
And living out what really God intended for humanity to look like. Thank you so much, Crystal. And if there's anything else that you'd like to add and share, please do so.
I love you. No, I truly, I think I've understood the love of God in a different way from going to TLCC. And I think from, again, sharing life with the people that I've shared life with, I've had some of the most deep, beautiful connections. And I'm just so grateful to God that we have a pastor who encourages it and who lives it, and who also challenges others to live it as well. So I'm grateful. I'm just truly grateful.
Well, we're so grateful for you. Thank you so much for sharing, and feel free to chime in at any point in this conversation as we move on to the next segment with Olivia and Damien. And Crystal, thank you again so much for sharing your first personal experience. And I know that that's a very vulnerable place to be in. And so we appreciate you, and we thank you that you're trusting Redline Ministry with your story. Okay, guys, sorry, we had to edit out just a little bit because we had some internet connection issues, but now we are back. Olivia and Damien are now on the bottom of the screen, and we're going to keep this going. So again, Crystal, you're awesome. I love you. You're amazing. And I want to hug you right now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you again
Thank
for
you.
sharing a very intimate part of your story as a parent. So what I was saying before is that I also think it's just really important for people to understand that a lot of what people are experiencing today is a direct result of what's happened in our past, especially in our nation, but also in the world. And by looking at history, we can see how everything has built up to this cultural moment. I'd love to bring in Olivia and Damien to this part of the historical context and this segment of RTV. And so just to move on to this next part, if you guys can briefly explain to our students, considering that we are in a time of history that is supposed to be considered, advanced and progressed, but how are we still looking at the effect of racism in society today, considering our nation's history and the history that's happened in our world?
Well, if I could just set things off, if we look really at the age of globalization, right? 1490s, right? And when the world started to become smaller, right? The interactions of the different worlds, particularly Europe, the Americas, and Africa, and then eventually Asia, and Australia, right? But when looking at early globalization, pretty much it was the origin of power through conquest, right? That created a lot of the social constructs, that we have today in terms of race. But in terms of the U.S. particularly, this is an area that, if anything, I do give the nod to Olivia here, just to kind of break down a little bit of how this was created here in the United States.
Yeah, so I think it's good and important I think what's a little challenging is that we're pretty much, what Damien just described could be like a 3-year, history course. It's at least a full year of global history for high school students, right? And not even, you're just touching on some of those isms. But it's important, I think, and because I'm addressing majority high school students here, it's important for you all to understand that why you study global history before U.S. history is because you have to understand that power structure that existed that led to the colonization of America, right? So exploration, and why we say it's exploration is because yes, they were exploring, but it also became an exploitation of a region, of an area that people were essentially conquering and claiming for another country. So to understand that power and sort of that buildup of that social construct over centuries, really, to be quite frank, we start around the 1400s. You get to the 1600s, early 1600s, when the first colony is founded in what we now call the United States. And that, I think, is really where we see the beginning of the origins of racism in the United States. It really starts with the colonization of the United States. Ironically, and I love, probably one of my favorite series of lessons I would teach in what I taught U.S. history at the advanced placement level, honors level, and at the college prep level, is really looking at the beginnings of labor in our country, right? It started actually with very poor indentured servants from Ireland, from England, from Great Britain, who were brought over here initially to be the labor force of these colonies, a lot of the farming that occurred. They were white, they were earning their, I guess you can say, freedom. They had contracts, some would last up to 7 to sometimes 15 years. And they were the first origins of labor in our country before the Atlantic slave trade, which were slave trading from Africa, the Middle Passage, came over to the colonies. When you start to see the African slave trade emerge into the U.S. colonies, the indentured servants and the African slaves were essentially the class, the lower working class, right? And I can't even refer to them as a working class. They were the lower class of the colonies who were oppressed. And what's fascinating to study during this time is the unity of this group, right? So really we get to see how power initially in the United States, in the colonies, was suppressing poverty, poor people, or people who they would oppress and see less than as their labor force. But because they outnumbered, so the white indentured servants and African slaves outnumbered the powering classes here, they started to not just intermingle, but intermarry. They started to organize, form rebellion collectively and together. And as they started to, let's say, cause too much trouble, right, for the ruling class, this is where we begin to see the separation of this combined group of white and black indentured servants and slaves. This is where we start to see the ruling class develop the first laws that we've ever known in this nation, right? So that they can begin to divide, suppress, and separate, right? How am I going to get a movement of people who are trying to fight something or try to fight against me? How am I going to suppress it? I have to divide them. I have to break them up. So essentially, these are the first laws we see in colonial America, which were called Black Codes. So the Black Codes were laws that were implemented to sort of give a little bit more power to the white indentured servant, or really, essentially make them feel, or at least assume more of a sense of a little bit more of an upper class towards the African slave, and really start suppressing the black African slave here in the colonies through these Black Codes, through these Black laws. And this is also where we start to see the origins of any sort of like law enforcement, not specifically what we see now, but law enforcers who are really now intentionally creating this very racial system of dividing this lower class and really now singling out those who are identifiable by color, and creating laws that truly suppress them beyond anything that had existed before. So it's important to see that, and I like to share that historical piece of evidence, because it's important to understand that I think human nature, the way God created us as human beings, is to see each other as humans first, especially when we're in commonality. It really took a power force in this country, at least, to very intentionally divide and create social constructs that make a certain group of people feel more important or better than another group just because of the color of their skin. So when we look at those origins in colonial America, that class, right, so those white indentured servants over decades and decades now become more of a working lower white class in the United States. You have the ruling power, and then you have the African slaves, and specifically in the South, because then there's a whole other history of Black explorers, highly educated Black people living in colonial America in the North. We don't learn about that in our history textbooks, unfortunately. But I'm talking specifically about how racism now starts to breed and grow in this nation. So fast forward, you have about 400 years, right, of this system now that's constantly suppressing, dividing, conquering. And then when we emancipate slavery, when we literally go to a civil war in this country, there's this tiny brief period of time, I think Pastor actually referenced it in his sermon recently, called the period of Reconstruction, where we see, I believe the author Langston Hughes refers to it as like this tiny glimpse, right, of a ray of hope, where, we start seeing opportunities opening up for Black people in this country, only to be suppressed again by creating laws. See, this is important to understand today, because when we see movements today, this is about highlighting the system, the laws that have historically suppressed Black people in this nation. And when we look at that period of history after Reconstruction, which is really technically known as the Jim Crow era, right? So this is an era of history where now we're going to use laws. We're going to make laws federally. We're going to make laws in our state that, and I like to explain it to teenagers, it's kind of like sneaky. You're using language, legislative language, to just essentially continue to oppress and restrict and limit the freedom of Black people in this country. Jim Crow, and this is where we see segregation, right, at its peak. We have segregated schools, segregated communities, segregation in every part of society. Then we see the civil rights movement that really head on addresses Jim Crow and segregation throughout our country. And I think this is an important period of time to understand, because I think a lot of people thought that it ended with the civil rights movement. I like to share with students, when the Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal, it was unconstitutional to segregate schools, for example. Even when that happened, right, when they said, okay, it is wrong and unconstitutional to separate people by race, the Supreme Court still said that states had to integrate their schools with all deliberate speed. And one of the last school districts to integrate didn't happen until 1983, legally, right, in the South. So when we look at that, when we look at how laws and specifically that era of the civil rights movement, how effective it was, in my opinion, I really believe that it masked a lot of very deep-rooted systemic issues that we have that were never really resolved. We put Band-Aids on things, but we never really addressed the core root of some of these issues. So now, post-civil rights, there's a term called the new Jim Crow, which is an era where there are different systems and laws that are created that I think now your generation is seeing in living color through these current events. So Damien is going to kind of explain what this post-civil rights new Jim Crow era looks like historically.
So real quick, when we look at segregation in schools, right, where now schools are integrated, there's still, intra-school segregation, right? Honors classes, AP classes versus the college prep classes, the overrepresentation of young Black males in special education and things like that. So there's that. Rockefeller laws, the mandatory minimum laws, where and here's where class kind of seeps in a little bit here, and that leads to more overrepresentation of people of color in prisons due to these mandatory minimums for nonviolent crimes and things like that. And as I stated before, even depictions in media. I mean, going back to The Birth of a Nation, that movie was 1914. Talking about a movie at this point that's 106 years old that depicted Black people, as these beasts, as these, as the criminals, rapists, as just right. And so when we look at Hollywood, movies and TV shows and things like that, there's always been an overrepresentation of particularly Black males as the criminal element, things like that. And so this is something that, even though legally there's been a lot of strides made in the right direction, going back to what you said before, the sneaky ways, right? There's all these other ways in which there's this suppression and this or negative overrepresentation of, people of color. So that's just a little something just to nibble on, just some pieces. It's obviously much deeper than this, but this is something that hopefully we could follow up on, or at least use this as a springboard for just more research and discourse and things.
But what does the Bible have to say about this? Where does God fit into all of this? And so, unfortunately, although in Scripture, Jesus makes his stance pretty clear on racism and social injustice and what our role as Christians should be with that, it is less well known. I guess similar to hearing about the historical context, that's also less well known. However, the true experience of the grace of Jesus Christ is it inevitably motivates any man, any woman to seek justice in this world. That's just a main theme of Scripture, is doing what is just, especially for people who are in need and who are in poverty or who are oppressed. And there's so much that I encourage you students to look into on your own journey, not only historically, but also biblically. Start researching what the Bible says about these topics. But today I'm just going to start by reading what Jesus said as he responded to religious leaders of his time questioning him, kind of trying to catch him when they asked him what the greatest commandment was. So when they asked him what the greatest commandment was, his response in Mark 12:13 said, "The most important one is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, The Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater. There's so much to unpack in that verse, and I'm only going to unpack just one part of it. But what I'm going to unpack right now is the part where he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Because when I go into Luke chapter 10, the expert in the law said it says that he wanted to justify himself. So he asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? And in Jesus' reply, he shares this story. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he had passion on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell to the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. For centuries, these 2 people groups experienced opposition towards one another, hostility, hate. There were incidents of war, one against the other, and dislike. And the parable meets issues like bigotry and prejudices with such force because the Samaritan was the one who was able to rise above those things and show mercy and compassion for the injured Jew, even after, and this is important to consider because a lot of times, and I know Crystal and I had this conversation about a sermon that she recently heard, a lot of times we look over the ones who just pass this person by and we don't really give them any thought. And we put a lot of thought towards the Samaritan, but I think it's important to recognize that what those 2 who passed them by did by ignoring was wrong. But the Samaritan was the one who rose above this. And even after the Jew's own countrymen passed him by and did nothing to help a person in need, he stopped to help and do something. Jesus also models this personally in John chapter 4. I won't open and read through it, and you can do that in your own time, but he approaches a woman at a well where he has a conversation with her. And also, just to give you some context, is in that time, religious and also social restrictions of the time was not just the fact that a man it was improper for a man to approach and talk to a woman, but also, again, a Jew talking to a Samaritan. So he depicts a Samaritan helping a bruised and battered Jew. And then now Jesus himself, as a Jewish man, is approaching a Samaritan woman at a well. So he has a conversation with her. And so by this countercultural act of rebellion in his social context, and of the way that he lived, and also by depicting the Samaritan helping a Jew, Jesus could not have found a more forceful way in his time to say that anyone at all in need, regardless of race, regardless of politics, class, or religion, is your neighbor. And the second most important commandment from God himself is to love your neighbor as yourself. So just to close with this, from the parable, we will learn 3 principles. And one is that a lack of love is often easy to justify. These men who walked past probably found it very easily culturally to do so because society and cultural restrictions and whatnot, and the history between the Jews and the Samaritans made it okay for them in their context to walk by. But even though it may be easier to ignore, it's never the right thing. And number 2, our neighbor is anyone of any race, creed, or social background who is in need. And 3, love means acting to meet the person's need. There's never a good reason to refuse to help. And as God's people, we must do justice in the world, and justice begins to take place as a result of a right relationship with God, first and foremost. And I think all of us can agree with that here, is that People need Jesus. People need God to even begin to address the sin issue that's going on with societal racism and systemic racism in our world. And again, a main theme throughout the Bible is God's concern for his people doing justice. So since our identity is tied up with Christ as Christians, and everything we do is response to the grace that he's extended to us, the forgiveness he's extended to us, when we do justice, we are reflecting the very nature and character of God. And so ultimately, as Christians, our gaze should always be away from ourselves and on to others, so that we can seek the peace of God in our environments, in our homes, in our communities, in this case, around race relationships and race relations. And today, with the help of Damien, Olivia, and Crystal, we've decided to model what that looks like by taking what society has created as these walls of hostility, as we've seen. But when you unite, that's where the true beauty begins in terms of change, right? And so we're taking these walls of hostility and we are purposefully turning them on their side into tables for conversation to happen. And I think relationship and conversation is just, for a student where sometimes you may feel overwhelmed and what do I do? Just start by having a conversation with someone who's different from you. Start by listening and leaning in and just learning. And then do your part to take that opportunity to learn for yourself. And then we just hoped today that to provide you with a little bit of that, right? I mean, I know it's just a snapshot in history, but again, this is just a snapshot just to provide with you guys a small glimpse of what it can look like to just listen and learn and create the unity that Christ died for. And so thank you guys all for joining me today in this talk. I'm so excited for future conversations to happen with all of you. And right now, well, first of all, clap for all of you guys. I need to put my little reaction thing on here. You guys are awesome. Like, I could sit here and listen to you all day. But right now, what we're encouraging is youth, if you feel comfortable, and this is by no means required of you, but we would love to offer you an opportunity to enter into the conversation now for yourselves. And so should you decide to join in the conversation together, we are providing you with what we're calling discussion breakout sessions. And in a minute, you will receive a Zoom link in the live chat. If you want to participate, go ahead and click on that Zoom link. And what you'll expect is you'll see Sarah Musial. She's one of our, she's actually our Redline Youth Coordinator. You'll also see a bunch of our Redline adult leaders there ready to just, say, hey, what's up? But from there, what you're going to do is you're going to be led and broken up into smaller groups that are led by our very own Redline adult leaders. And for parents, if you're watching right now, we want to emphasize to both you and to students that we've done a lot of back-end hard work to make sure that these breakout sessions are a safe place for our youth through guided discussion by our trained adult leaders. And so we hope that you guys continue this conversation, and we hope as a ministry to continue this conversation in weeks and years to come. We love you guys. Be blessed.
Hi everyone, I'm Kiana.
Hey, what's up? I'm Dave.
I'm Deirdre.
Hey, it's Liz.
What's up? I'm Emily.
Hey, I'm Ellis.
Hey guys, it's Seth.
Hi, my name is Costelle.
We leaders will be there to guide you in small groups and provide a safe place for you to enter the conversation.
Let's talk.
Let's talk.
Let's talk.
I'm looking forward to seeing you.
I will see you there.
I'll see you there, Redline.
See you there.